So excited to be chatting with Natalie from Navattic. Natalie, thanks for joining us today.
Thanks so much for having me.
So let's discuss your advisor program. Are they influencers, strategic advisors, customer advocates?
A little bit all of the above. So a lot of them are customers or were customers who've now maybe transitioned into consulting or like full-time content creation. But they do a lot of strategic advising as well as obviously promoting Navattic, a little bit of like influencer content creation, but kind of a mix of all of them.
Okay. What would you say is the breakdown between the two? How often are they providing advice versus creating content?
Yeah, it's like 70% advice, which I think surprises a lot of people because I get a lot of people ask me about this program and they only see the content creation side. So they assume it's full influencers, but a lot of the ideas they get for their content, ideas of like, okay, what should I post about? What will engage? A lot of that comes from advice sessions we have where I ask them about our go-to-market or positioning and messaging. So really is a lot of advice.
So how did this program come to be? Can we talk through the inception of it a bit?
Yeah, I'd love to say I had this brilliant vision. No, it actually just kind of came organically. So I saw there were a few people in the space sort of posting about interactive demos, talking about it very early on. And I would just engage with them on LinkedIn because I was like, oh, this is cool. They're doing free promotion for us. And we got to talking a little bit. And then one person said, hey, let's make this a more formal thing. So we sort of experimented with a few different ways to sponsor content they were already doing and then brought them in a little more as advisor. And then there was another person in the space who posted somewhere, I think on Twitter, like, oh, I really want an interactive demo. And so we reached out, and early days we said, hey, we give it to you for free if you give us feedback and, make sure that get to know you a little, maybe help promote it. And together we kind of worked through this concept of advisor. That's where like the 70-30 split came from. Originally came more promotion, but I started to learn more the value was advising. And then once we figured out the model, then we strategically decided to scale up and went and looked for people who were either customers or just are kind of already a really good ICP match with our audience.
Interesting. So correct me if I'm wrong, but you have a pretty lean marketing team. It's you and one other.
Yep, two of us.
Which is incredible. And to build such an incredible advisory program that's half advising, half influencer marketing, I'm sure a lot of that has to do with ruthlessly prioritizing. So how do you go about actually managing that along with everything else?
Yeah, I will say, and a big advice I give for anyone who wants to do advisor influencers is it probably takes like 20% of my time.
Oh, wow.
And so it is, because a lot of it is meetings, giving them updates, hearing their advice, getting to know them as people. Like advising, I always say advising is not a channel you can just put money in and forget, kind of like Google Ads. It's kind of a two-way street. But we learned early on that while maybe advising when we just had like two wasn't bringing us the most amount of leads, they were our best leads. Sales would always say they're less competitive. It's kind of like a referral because they feel like they know them. So once sales started saying like, hey, we really like these prospects, like they're better than others, that's when I got more buy-in from the whole team to make it a priority on the marketing side.
That's awesome.
So I lead a B2B marketing team. We do influencer marketing. I'm also on the other side of the table where brands pay me to say things sometimes. So I know that the obvious benefit is the additional reach and eyeballs, right, through distribution, whether it's directly about our product or our narrative or what have you. I'm curious, like, what other benefits have you seen from this program?
I think another really obvious one is like message testing. And not just message testing where if I'm doing a website launch, for example, I'll ask them all for feedback, they'll give it, but really message testing with their audiences. Because if I post something right, generally on LinkedIn, people are going to be nice. Generally, they're not going to be like, I didn't really like that or that didn't resonate. Versus if an advisor posts an idea I'm thinking about, you'll get a little bit more like organic feedback and posts that do really well. And they might change it a little bit how I'd say it. And I'll be like, oh, that's interesting. Like this person commented this way and really responded to that. Or, ooh, that didn't work as well. So a lot of really getting to see exactly how your audience thinks about this topic. And I'd say, honestly, the sneaky number one benefit is leadership buy-in, right? When I have an idea, so for example, we did the website, and I definitely wanted to do a little more brand-focused messaging than necessarily more direct, maybe product-focused messaging. And I always joke as a marketer, even though our job is to have opinions, no one wants to hear your opinion. You need to have data or another person who says it. And it was a little hard at first to push the more brand-focused messaging, but then once I showed the feedback I got from the advisors, because it was in a Slack thread, I showed their thinking, why they liked this messaging over others. I gave them a lot of options, and then suddenly it really clicked with the rest of my team. Like, oh, this isn't just Natalie's, not just Natalie thinks this is cool. There was research and thought that went behind it. And if our ICP, who is represented in our advisors, likes it, it's probably a good fit.
That's really cool.
All right, the million-dollar question. As somebody who also builds influence marketing programs and partners with brands, it can be really hard to measure success, especially when you think outside of the marketing team, right? The leadership team, how are you going to get that buy-in and show that it's working? So how do you measure the program and keep getting that leadership buy-in?
Yeah, so we do direct attribution as far as how do you hear about us.
Okay.
Pretty classic. And I mean, we sell to marketers, so I always say take that with a grain of salt. But we say people, this person's post, this person recommended me. So we do see direct attribution that way. Then also word of mouth leads was huge. Last year we were able to double the amount of word of mouth leads we got. And we know, again, those are some of our best leads. We know those convert higher. So that was a pretty good indicator. And a little more top of funnel, I think early days, our LinkedIn following. I think our company page went from like 1K followers to 12K in a year. My own page went from like 1 to 7K. So very on top of, actual pipeline metrics, it was so clear it was building our audience. Like I'd love to say my brilliant LinkedIn post were the things that's doing it, but clear as the visor supporting that.
Yep. Successful and humble.
Yeah, seriously,
they
this
don't
is
make
great.
them like you anymore. They really don't. But sorry, real quick, I want to compliment
please.
again because I had no idea there's only one other marketer. I've heard of you all. So you say word of mouth, like that's, I have heard of you from the LinkedIn scrolls and people talking. So it's really just that like credit to you that with one other marketer, someone who doesn't know yet what you do yet, but I hear you all the time. And I know, and I've tied you to interactive demos. And I think in that mind share we were talking about in the previous segment, like to be able to accomplish that is hard enough. To be able to accomplish it in the speed that you did with one other marketer, I hope my marketing leadership team is not listening to this. We need more headcount.
Absolutely. Actually, one of the things that's interesting is, Devin mentioned, I tried doing this. I have an advisor program, really amazing, folks around the table. But one of the things I struggle with is how can I, as a, again, early stage company, actually staff up to engage the advisorship, to kind of keep them, in the know on what's happening, engage them the right way, to ask the questions we need to get at, we need their kind of feedback on. Are there any mistakes that you've seen kind of along the way for our ability as on the brand side or the marketing side to actually, work with our advisors in a way that makes sense?
I think what you just touched on would be a big mistake, and honestly something I want to be better at as well is giving time to engage, and not just to, make sure they're posting things on LinkedIn, but to really, again, get to know the person, their methodology, their way of marketing, because you're going to use every advisor a little differently once you understand that. I think a little more tactically, if you're thinking about building out this program, one thing I always warn against is just equity-based payment programs, because I think it sounds so great, right? Because it's kind of free for you as a startup and you might not have as much cash. But in reality, for someone else getting equity, you get it and it sits there and you might not get a reward for like 5-10 years. So it's very easy to say, yes, I want to be advisor. And then when other things come up, it falls because it's not like a constant payment. So I do heavily recommend, you can maybe do a mix, but do payments, because that's also a monthly reminder of like, oh yes, I'm working with this person. I want to make sure I'm providing value. And also I just think, let's be real, they have a lot of other things going on. I want to fairly compensate them.
Yeah.
Yeah. So what would you recommend for any marketer who's looking to build their own influencer program?
I think the first thing I say is start with like customers. It doesn't have to be, another mistake I was going to say is this idea that you have to go after people who have like 50, 100K followers. Actually, a lot of our advisors are closer to the like 10 to 20 range, because you want people who really understand your audience and are built in. And we've even made this mistake before too. So if you're looking to do it, find customers, and maybe they're not big influencers yet, but find people who look like, maybe they post, maybe they go to conferences more, because then you can also help them build their brand, which is a goal you're looking for. So they'll be excited to do it versus finding someone who's maybe it's like a side gig. They might not be as excited. And I know you're probably thinking like, B2B marketing, that works great. I was actually talking to a customer the other day who works in dentistry. They sell to dentists, and they still found customers to use as B2B influencers. It looks a little different. They might not have them post on LinkedIn, but I do think the simplest way is just like find 2 to 3 customers, find what works for them, and then just help them grow their brand.
One of the things I heard you say earlier was the how did you hear about us kind of flow for actually attributing leads to the advisor program. I was curious how you orchestrate that. Is it, we're seeing as they post in these channels just some organic kind of lead registration kind of coming through, or are there any incentives? Like, how do you think about sort of getting, driving effectively more leads through the advisor program?
So I will say it's not like we, pay per post or anything like that.
Right.
We do say aim to post about once a month, but also understand advisors have their own jobs. Maybe 1 month they post twice, maybe 1 month they don't post. That's okay. But what we will see is like a week where maybe we're doing a big promotion or a lot of advisors happen to post, leads tend to go up. I know this is not great math. We can attribute, some people will say, LinkedIn, they'll say this person's specific LinkedIn post. So that helps, and that would just be able to see that correlation on weeks that are heavy on LinkedIn. But I do think it's also important, don't just drill into your advisors, post on LinkedIn all the time, because they have jobs and you want it to be organic and authentic.
Yeah.
That's the other thing I always tell advisors, you know your audience better than me. I'll give you ideas to what to post, I'll give you inspiration, but I'm not going to tell you to say exactly this.
So actually, reminding of something you mentioned earlier, you don't just look at follower counts, right? You don't just need somebody who has 50,000 or 100,000. But what criteria do you tend to look at when you're trying to onboard new influencers?
Yeah, the biggest thing is honestly, do our audience follow them? Does our audience follow them? So can we see target accounts are following them? And this is also a really good tip to help convince your CEO, right? If you have specific target accounts, you can say, hey, this person from this account follows this person. Also, early days of joining Navattic, I just asked customers. I was just like, hey, who do you follow?
Interesting.
Where do you go to get your information? And it really came from that. We did do a little bit of searching, and then honestly, a lot of it came from me just being on LinkedIn. But I would say the easiest thing to do is just ask your customers who they follow.
Have you considered trying out other platforms as well, or is LinkedIn your bread and butter?
For us, LinkedIn's our bread and butter, but some of our advisors also have podcasts. Some of them also have newsletters. So we try to work with them where it makes sense. I think that's also another good tip if you're doing an advisor program. It's really hard to fit them all into one perfect box. So you might have different structures for different people depending on the content they like. And again, I want to encourage them to do content they like versus being it just has to be LinkedIn.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense. Any final thoughts or advice that you would share with marketers who aren't sure where to start?
I think just start small. Don't think you have to do this huge program with 100 people. We started for really 6 months with 2. Start small, learn what works, learn what gets them excited, how your audience reacts, and then scale up from there, because it's also much easier to go out to people and say, hey, this person are already advisors, versus if you are just starting from scratch.
Perfect. Well, thank you so much, Natalie. It was great chatting with you, and we'll see you back downstairs.
Yeah, thank you much for having me.
Awesome.